And now I would like just to give you a brief presentation of the work in which today's convention is located, with some details of our work on the Atlas. As Rionella has just said, one of the goals of the World Rural Landscape Initiative is the production of a World Rural Landscape Atlas that aims to provide a clearer and shared framework for recognizing the peculiarities of rural landscapes in each part of the world. Landscape knowledge in recent years has been formalized in Landscape Atlas. These are heterogeneous materials. In general, the reading methods aims to identify different landscape units based on orographic, climatic, geographic, soil use data, vegetation. Research specifically dedicated to rural landscape at a world level, at a scale that exceeds that of the single nation, and whose knowledge and classification stresses cultural aspects, is few and far between. Dating back to the second half of the 20th century, are two published studies that still guide all attempts to classify rural landscapes of the world. The first is the work of Lebeau in 1969. It is one of the basic manuals for the study of agrarian structures and provides basic definitions that have long guided the work of researchers. For Lebeau, an agrarian structure is intended as the whole of the durable and deep connections established between man and the land, based on agronomic, demographic, socioeconomic, and technical factors. Another one is that of Meus, that in 1990 published another significant study. He came to a classification of the European agrarian landscape based on 13 described types, highlighting formal aspects, socioeconomic aspects, historical ones. And based on these two holistic studies, a more recent research is Eucaland project of 2010, that attempt to classify the European agrarian landscape, including processes, activities, and functions, highlighting the historical and agricultural dynamics, the characteristics of continuity and change. So, therefore, it is increasingly approaching a reading of rural landscape as landscape systems, where observable forms are the visible sign of the complexity of the organizational, functional, social, symbolic relationships that are held together by them. And starting from this holistic approach, guidelines for the reading of a rural landscape system have been developed within the World Rural Landscape Initiative. They are articulated on two experimental levels. The first level consists of a general classification of world rural landscapes. This one you can see in this table at this stage of our work. The identification of each class is the result of the combined consideration of several aspects, kind of crop production, kind of livestock, land regime, and so on, and wants to underline, starting from the nomenclature, a morphological approach to the landscape that mainly concerns the study of landforms and man-made landscape, and the consequent relationship between man and land. So the focus of our classification is on how human needs have modified natural factors through social and cultural structures. The identification of a class, as you can see, is accompanied by the definition of more widely spread geographic areas and some specific examples. The description of each class is specified with reference to the rural morphology, the rural structure, the rural settlement as defined by the law, and the historical character intended to clarify the origin of each class of landscape. The classification wants to underline common characteristics rather than particularities, identifying the predominant aspects of rural landscapes over quite large areas, rather than single elements and specificities. It is the result of landscape characterization and interpretation rather than of a data recording. At the second level of reading is that which specifies a rural landscape system within each identified class. For this purpose, as Rionella has just said, a survey sheet has been defined by the working group, and the sheet describes the main landscape system that are widespread on a world scale. The description provides the identification of the components of the system, of its functioning, of the production process, of the social structure, its origin, and the change that have occurred over time, and also its geographical distribution. The description tries to follow an holistic approach that starts from the action that the whole is more than the sum of parts, and considers landscape a multi-level stratified system comprehensive of ecological, social, and cultural aspects. So we try to describe landscape system from an environmental point of view, for example, describing climate exposure, food, crops choices, cultivation system that result from it, the description of the space that will capture the man-made forms both in the built part and the open one of each rural landscape, typology of the settlement, relation to the soil morphology, type of buildings, materials, sites and shapes of fields, and so on. But the visible shapes will reveal to a historical reading their origin and the motivation that have generated them. The emphasis on one side of the permanences, on the other of the changes will lead to action-oriented knowledge. And the social dimension will investigate the economic and the behavioral factors expressed in the agricultural structure and will be readable through the agricultural practices, cultivation techniques, economic systems, property, tenants, and relationship. And finally, the reading also of the perceptive dimension, highlighting both aspects related to sensory perception, but also to the interpretation and the meaning attributed by people, expressed in customs, typical products, sacredness of some form, and so on. So tangible and intangible components are described themselves and in relation to each other, highlighting the system to which they give rise. The mapping promoted just some few conclusions, but also perspectives of our works. The mapping promoted by World Rural Landscape Initiative intends to focus on processes rather than on forms. It aimed at recognizing historical system of rural landscape that are still readable by identifying complex micro areas. It is a complex and in some ways also pioneering operation involving many researchers all over the world. Working at a world scale is a factor of complexity. The bibliography on the issue is quite poor and lacking synthetic descriptions that go beyond the specificity of national scale. It's not in terms of just in terms of production and land use. So it requires the overcoming of local specificities, making it possible in each case for each region to find itself within the global framework. Is it possible, this kind of work? What about, for example, our today's discussion? What about rural landscape and the state? Is it possible to find general and common characteristics in the different landscape system we are going to discuss? What is the role of the rural landscape in each system? And in what class we can register this kind of landscape system? I just leave you with some of these questions. I'm sure that our discussion will be a fruitful discussion to contribute to this work. So I immediately give the microphone to the first presenter, Lennon. Show us the 19th century Eastern Australia homesteads and their rural estate settings.